O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
Welcome back. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I want to talk to you guys about the legend of Samson, masculinity, the detriments of temptation, and female deceit. So today we're going to be hitting on really some of the topics that were mentioned in previous streams, as I'm sure you guys would expect. But we're going to be reading actually all of chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16 in the book of Judges, all of which recount the life of Samson. So we're going to be diving into the scripture. We're going to be talking about sort of general overviews of Samson. I have a few things I want to say about Dagon, and that should pretty much wrap up today's video. I don't plan on streaming too long today because I do have our Bible study or our theology class in my church that starts at 7. So I do have that. I do have prior engagements that I have to be there for. So we will not be doing a long 2-hour, 2.5 hour stream. Hopefully this is about an hour to an hour and a half at the most, because again, the class starts at 7. So hope everyone is having a fantastic hump day. A few things in regards to housekeeping. I do want to say thank you very much for everyone who has signed up over at the website, davidpatrickharry.com/register. If you enjoy what I'm doing on this YouTube channel and you would like to contribute, think of it as a monthly donation, if you will. But if you'd like to have access to exclusive content that I'm putting out every week, make sure to go to the website and get a website membership. That is one of the best ways to support, and I would greatly appreciate that. Also, if you are wanting to do any one-on-one sessions, had a few people sign up for that. Feel free to sign up for that over at the website in the store section. That is an option. And I do want to give a special shout out for Orthodoxy First tomorrow with Luke. I will be stopping in on the upcoming, explosive, exciting podcast discussion live stream with Luke tomorrow, talking about masculinity, aesthetics, and really fitness, and how all that stuff ties together in regards to being a masculine, Orthodox Christian man. So we're going to be getting much into the fitness side of things, masculine health, that type of stuff. So that is tomorrow at 7 o'clock over on his channel, Orthodoxy First, 7 o'clock. Make sure you are there. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Luke. He is a good ortho bro, a good guy. So always want to help out our brothers. That really wraps up everything that I wanted to say. I was going to, as I mentioned to you, I was thinking about today was potentially going to be a split between talking about putting down my dog and Samson. And then I thought, geez, I probably should split those up. So I'm going to do a memorial stream just for my dog and putting him down, and sort of reflecting on life and death, reflecting on the theology of pets, the Orthodox theology of how we are actually reunified with our pets in the afterlife. So that'll probably be Friday or Saturday, most likely Saturday. I have a ton of school stuff I need to work on. I've been swamped with other things. So tomorrow, other than Luke's stream and going to the gym, is all going to be schoolwork. And then so is Friday. So most likely I will stream Saturday, doing a memorial, talking about putting my dog down, and then talking about the theology of animals, the theology of pets within Orthodoxy and stuff like that. So should be a good stream Saturday. That is basically all that I have to say, and so we can begin to get in today's topic because we are on a time crunch. So want to first say, please smash that like if you haven't. Always appreciate that. Would greatly appreciate it. If you guys are interested in following a little bit more of my regular day-to-day life, feel free to follow me over on Instagram. I use the story feature quite a bit. So if you actually or interested, maybe you're not, but if you are, that is where you would find me there. I'm going to also, I have a new page. I don't recommend anybody getting on Facebook, to be honest. But because I've upgraded my Instagram page to a business page that allows me to do the swipe up feature when you do stories, it needs to be tied to a Facebook page. So I had to create a Facebook page for Church of the Eternal Logos. So if you search Church of the Eternal Logos, you will find that now. Or if you just search davidpatrickcarey.com, you'll probably find me, and then Church of the Eternal Logos that way. So just wanted to share that. Samson is who we're going to be getting into today. How many of you guys know the legend of Samson? The anti-Masonic party said, "Don't tell me what to do, bro." I promise not to. But Samson, as I mentioned before, I think is a really interesting figure and actually speaks, as we will read today, I think it really speaks to the contemporary and the modern man in a multitude of ways. And so if we're going to look just a general overview of Samson, he's one of the last judges of Israel. He was a Nazarite, right? That's where he gets his strength from in regards to not cutting his hair. So we see a sort of prefiguring of the Annunciation, if you will, and Samson and the angel of the Lord basically telling his mother that he's going to be a Nazarite and a holy man and all that stuff. Now, in regards to, again, the usefulness in regards to contemporary man and the modern man, I would say, I did the whole stream last time on the symbolism of the lion and how the Bible uses the lion in a multitude of ways. At times would seem to be in opposition to each other, but in regards to Christ being the Lion of Judah, there's also the idea of the lion being the beast of all beasts, Satan himself being that beast. And so then the conquering of the lion in different ways is also very symbolic. We see this with Samson. Samson, as we will read, actually destroys a full-grown lion with his bare hands. And so we see, symbolically speaking, at an archetypal level, from the perception of semiotics, we see Samson trying to conquer the beast, if you will. And that can mean your own passions, that can mean sin, that can mean really the fallenness of this world, if you will. But also, we see him as a warrior. We see him as a fighter. We see him massacre the Philistines, right? A whole army of the Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. This is something we're going to read again today. So without even having what would be an obvious weapon of choice, he destroys an entire army himself. So we see somebody willing to fight, somebody willing to face their enemies. We also see him marry a Philistine woman against the wishes of his parents. Now, I have a few things I want to comment in regards to this that I think are going to be interesting, right? And maybe not in the same way that you think I am, but even the Orthodox Study Bible and the footnotes reinforce the interpretation I'm going to put forth, and that is Samson, against the wishes of his parents, against the traditions that he's actually rooted in, wants to marry a Philistine woman. Eventually, he actually does marry that Philistine woman, as we will read. These are no spoiler alerts. I hope everybody's read the Bible and is familiar with Samson. So we're not trying to, tell everybody, spoiler alert. This is just how it is. So he marries the Philistine woman against the wishes of his parents. Eventually, they're not seeing eye to eye. They sort of temporarily separate. His wife's father, so his stepfather, if you will, or father-in-law, I should say, his father-in-law actually gives her to one of his friends, and they marry. And so when Samson comes back, he finds out that his wife has already been given to another man, and it was one of his friends. So we see betrayal. Then he falls in love with another Philistine woman, in Delilah, who tricks him, tempts him, seduces him. And what does she do? She weakens him. And by weakening him, she allows the enemies come and blind him, gouge his eyes out. And what do? They mock him. They bring him out in public for a display of play, as we will see, and tie him to the two pillars of the Philistine temple, which was devoted to Dagon. Dagon is an ancient Mesopotamian Canaanite deity, And yes, we are going to say a few things in regards to Dagon and maybe the Western miter hat, right? I think there's something that should be articulated here, that if you look at the difference between an Eastern Orthodox miter hat and then the miter hat of the papacy in the Catholic West, there seems to be a little bit of Dagon symbolism there. So we're also gonna be hinting and touching on that. But why is this a useful symbol for the contemporary man? Because so many of us, as I was trying to highlight in the previous stream, have actually come to Christianity after being engrossed and enmeshed in alternate worldviews, alternate paradigms, and conflicting presuppositions and spiritual systems that we were all kind of engrossed in at one point or another. And then somehow, whether it's our life experience, whether it's a mystical experience, whether it's somebody just leads us, whether it's the laws of logic or deeper thoughts of and investigations into theology, we eventually get to Christianity. And that is where we sort of realize that we are Samson, tied to the pillars of our enemy, blinded. And the reason we're blind is because we have been tempted. We have fallen prey to our own passions. And this is then where we find many of ourselves. And so what does Samson do? Maybe it's not as hopeful for some of you, but he ends up pulling down the pillars, destroys the temple of a degenerate pagan god, Dagon, kills thousands and thousands of Philistines, but he also kills himself. So how does that all relate to the modern man? Well, we see so much going on here. We see somebody who's physically strong, trying to, symbolically, I think with the line, maybe conquering one's passions or dealing with the beasts of the world. But then it has vices maybe for beauty. Maybe these women were particularly sexy in one way or another. And he wanted the Philistine woman. They get married despite the tradition, despite the advice of his parents, and that fails. He falls for another Philistine woman. And what happens? Again, he's tempted, he's seduced, he's then lied to, he's deceived, right? His hair is cut off, he's weakened, he now no longer has a superhuman power, and because he's weakened, he is now blinded. Because he is now blinded, he's now put into slavery. And because he's into slavery, now he's being mocked. And then when his hair starts to grow back, and this is what I'm saying, he sort of wakes up, if you will, or the old Samson reemerges, he realizes where he is, and he pulls down the two pillars, destroying the temple of his enemy. And right now, we are in the globalist structure. I mean, there isn't like a specific physical temple. There isn't a specific pillar that we have to pull down to destroy this thing, but we are Samson, tied to the pillars, holding up the degenerate temple of globalism, of the satanic agenda, of the one world government, the one world religion, everything that we know to be true. And that's what a lot of our awakening process is when you think about it. It's that we've gone through a journey to realize that we are chained to the pillars of our enemy. And now it's on us to destroy that temple. And for some of us, as for Samson, that is going to be a destruction of ourselves, right? Samson died when he pulled down those pillars and destroyed the temple. He died. And then that relates to conversations I've had previously on the role of masculinity, and that a man who's a leader, actually the self-sacrificial nature of a leader, of somebody who's really embodying masculine qualities, is present within Christ. It's present within every great general, every great leader of war, every great man of history. There is a leadership quality that's also, to some degree, needs to be self-sacrificial for a larger good, for the collective of one sort or another. And again, we see that in Samson, and I think that might or should resonate with many of us in the contemporary period. So I wanted to say that. I thought it was interesting. Some of the secular scholars want to tie Samson to Hercules in the Greek tradition, or even within the Sumerian tradition with like Enkidu. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but it has to do with him being sort of a stronger figure, superhuman strength of one sort or another, and even him slaying the lion. Secular scholars who are looking into motifs and stuff like that would say, oh, that seems very reminiscent of Hercules, this or that. So just wanted to throw that out there as trying to be objective, being academic in our conversations. But I wanted to read a little section on Christian interpretations of Samson before we get into Scripture itself. And so it reads, and I just thought this was interesting, wanted to share with you guys, that Samson's story has also garnered commentary from a Christian perspective. The Epistle to the Hebrews praises him for his faith. Ambrose, following the betrayal of Josephus and Philo, presents Delilah as a Philistine prostitute and declares that men should avoid marriage with those outside the faith, lest instead of love of one's spouse, there be treachery. And I want to pause there, because when I was talking about earlier in regards to Samson's parents being objecting to him marrying a Philistine woman, I wanted to connect too with the sort of re-emerging consciousness, especially within the more right-wing circles, of in-group preference, if you will, and however you want to define that. Now, I wanted to say that I'm not being so tribal in the sense of specific ethnic or racial categories must be upheld and you should only date within those parameters. I'm not against that, but I'm saying that what we see here, of course, Christ dissolves the distinction between Jew and Gentile. And so to a degree within the Christian framework, there's nothing wrong with interracial relationships. And I would agree with that. Now, when interracial relationships are being pushed on people for a sinister purpose, like we see with advertisement and the relationship between opposing ethnic groups seem to be forcing interracial relationships on us, well, there's sort of a sinister context and nature to that. That's something a little bit different. But I do want to highlight that, as it's saying here, what we see, how we can interpret Samson and that dialectic between Israel versus the Philistines and him choosing outside the tribe, outside Israel for a Philistine woman, is really any Christian man who's wanting to be with a woman who's not Christian. And so we as Orthodox Christians are the true Israel. And so we still are Israel. And as Israel, we should then date and marry women who are also part of Israel. And that would mean an Orthodox Christian woman or a Christian woman who will become Orthodox if you are an Orthodox man. So I think, again, that speaks to the contemporary period, especially with multiculturalism, with globalism in general. I mean, myself, it's not like I have a pure heritage or a pure racial or ethnic identity. I'm a mixture of multiple Western European nations, but we can take that framework, even with Samson and his first wife, and then Samson with Delilah, as really the detriments of trying to establish relationships with women outside one's faith, as is highlighted here, as was highlighted early within the church tradition and how to understand Samson. And so when we then are tempted and led by women who are outside of our tradition, again, it's going to do the same thing as happened to Samson. We're going to be tempted, we're going to be deceived, we're going to be blinded, we're going to be, in one way or another caught up in slavery, right? You can talk about the wage slavery that we exist in now, or, there's multiple ways you can frame that. But eventually, we're going to be led and tied to the pillars of our enemy's temple, because where can things go if they're not moving towards God, right? So, interesting thing that I just wanted to highlight there. Now, Caesarius of Aries interpreted Samson's death as prefiguring the crucifixion of Jesus, remarking, quote, "Notice here an image of the cross. Samson extends his hands spread out to the two columns as to the two beams of the cross. He also equates Delilah with Satan, who tempted Christ." Very interesting. Following this trend, more recent Christian commentators have viewed Samson as a type of Jesus Christ. This is called Anyways, based on similarities between Samson's story and the life of Jesus in the New Testament, Samson's and Jesus' births were both foretold by angels who predicted that they would save their people. Samson was born to a barren woman, and Jesus born to a virgin. Samson defeated a lion. Jesus defeated Satan, whom the first epistle of Peter describes as a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Again, if you want to learn more about lion symbolism within the Bible, check out my last stream. That's what it was all about. And we have talked about 1 Peter 5:8, which is being referenced here. Ebenezer Cobham Brewer notes that his A Guide to Scripture History, the Old Testament, that Samson was, quote, blinded, insulted, and enslaved prior to his death, and that Jesus was blindfolded, insulted, and treated as a slave prior to his crucifixion. Brewer also compares Samson's death among the, quote, wicked with Christ being crucified between two thieves. So I thought that was really interesting and wanted to share with you guys. I thought it gives a little bit of a perspective there and kind of gives us a framework for even how the Christian tradition began to understand a little bit of Samson. Pano threw in a super chat. We got $5 here. Pano throws in, good ortho bro. Fellow Hoosier says, these are purity laws which prevent you from losing your identity. Christ extends his invitation to all. However, this doesn't dissolve distinctions. Oh, that's a great comment, Pano. Thank you for the $5, brother. And let me read that again. This is a great comment. Pano says, these are purity laws which prevent you from losing your identity. Christ extends his invitation to all. However, this doesn't dissolve distinctions. And what he's referring to is a conversation we were highlighting between in-group preference, racial groups, Samson marrying a Philistine woman, and how that sort of dialectical tension between Israeli and Philistine, him going outside his tribe, all these detrimental things that occur because of really engaging with women, probably for more sensual, pleasureful purposes. And so I know I'm weak to that. That's why, again, it speaks to all of us, right? When we engage with women who aren't Christian, I'm taking this as the framework, how we can reinterpret and understand Samson and Delilah, or his first wife. So thank you very much, Pano. This is a great comment. Thank you again for the $5, brother. Really, really appreciate it. So that was what I wanted to say about just kind of quick overview of Samson before we get into scripture. But I also want to say something about Dagon. Actually, before I get into Dagon, let me highlight a few things. First, this was the meme that some of you guys were ready for me to go right at 5:30, and I said, "Oh, give me a minute. I need to grab a meme." This was the meme I was grabbing. So I thought this was hilarious. Shout out to you know who you are, who sent me this. I don't know if you want your handle made public or anything. So thank you for the person who DM'd me this meme before going live today. I think it's hilarious. Delilah on her IG story when she vowed to destroy the most powerful homeboy in the hood. And so this is Delilah grabbing the hair of Samson, right? Because that's where Samson's strength was located, because he was a Nazarite. So I thought that was hilarious. Wanted to share with you guys. And then I also wanted to talk about something interesting in regards to, there's two main paintings of Samson, right? I have the two located right here. The top one is by Peter Paul Rubens, the famous sort of Renaissance painter. And the second one is by his student, Anthony Van Dyck. So I wanted to highlight, so the second one, the lower one, is actually a student of the top one. So Peter Paul Rubens, famous painter, right? And the difference is their portrayal of Delilah. And I bring this up because when you look at the way that Ambrose, that Jerome, that various church fathers interpreted Delilah, that she was reminiscent of Satan, that she was really a sort of evil woman. And so this is depicted in the top one. Peter Paul Rubens depicts Delilah with her breast out, Samson falling asleep in her lap, this big, muscular, masculine figure, nude, laying in her lap, and her breast is out and all this stuff. This is because what Peter Paul was doing is demonstrating Delilah as a very sinister figure to tempt, to deceive Samson. Whereas you see in the second one, by his student, Anthony Van Dyke, Delilah's reaching out for Samson, because in the second one, he's portraying Delilah as regretful of her treachery, regretful of her deceit, and how she had made these machinations with the fellow Philistines in regards to finding out how to prevent Samson from, or figuring out the source of his strength, rather, as we will read. So I thought this was very interesting, that maybe as we move forward in the more contemporary period, we see more romantic or more positive frameworks for Delilah, whereas at least within, it seemed like, from my understanding, from my research, the historical sort of position of most church fathers and the church was that Delilah is not a sympathetic figure. And so I just wanted to highlight that. It's something subtle, but a little tidbit to throw in there. So now you know, right? The more you know, just like the commercial. The more you know. Two very famous depictions of Samson, both of which depict Delilah in opposite ways. I chose Peter Paul. I chose the historical interpretation as Delilah as tempestuous, right? So I just wanted to throw that out there. So now I wanted to say a few things about Dagon. Dagon, as we will see, is the god of the Philistine temple that Samson destroys. Who is Dagon? Some of you guys may have heard of Dagon before. He was an ancient, as I said, Mesopotamian and Canaanite deity. He's often referred to as like the fish god or the merman. Dagon is actually, he has a sort of hominoid figure from the waist up. He looks like a king, and then he looks like a fish from the waist down. However, he's not an ocean deity. He's not a deity of fish or anything like that. Actually, he's an agricultural deity, and that comes from the etymological origins of his name actually come from like a cloudy sky, then symbolic of rain, which is important for people who grow crops and who are agricultural. And so the fish god is ancient Mesopotamian and Canaanite. Now, I want to highlight a little bit. Let me read something real quick in regards to Dagon to give a little bit more context that I thought was interesting, and that is regard to him as Marnas. So this is another term referred to, and this was used in, it actually comes from the Aramaic, and it means Lord. Marnas, M-A-R-N-A-S in the English, or Marna, the Lord in Aramaic. And so this was a term that was very popular, especially within the Gaza area. And this is when, again, Gaza is where our story today is going to take place. So I just wanted to read that during the Roman imperial period, an abundance of material and literary sources indicate that the cult of Marnas, or Dagon, was associated with the ancient city of Gaza, located in the eastern Mediterranean on what is today Palestine. According to Taco Terpstra, the literary text represents Marnas as a sky god who also performed oracles. Ancient authors equate him with the Cretan Zeus, but the tradition seems to be Hellenistic in date. The depictions of Marnas in coin iconography is not consistent. At times he is shown naked, similar to a naked and bearded Zeus, either seated on a throne or standing while holding a lightning bolt. The other images show Marnas holding a bow, standing on a pedestal in front of a female deity. Regardless of the variety of depictions, the abundance of the term on coins indicates that the inhabitants of Gaza held him in high esteem and associated this god with their city. Now, in the Christian literature, Marnas is mentioned in the works of the 4th century scholar and theologian Jerome in several stories from his life of Saint Hilarion, written around 390 CE, or AD, I should say, in which he condemns his adherents as idolatrous and as enemies of God, as again we will see today in Judges. Violent sentiments against the cult of Marnas and the destruction of his temple in Gaza are described by Mark the Deacon in his account on the life in the early 5th century Saint Porphyry of Thessalonica. After the destruction of Marnas' temple, Mark the Deacon petitioned the emperor Arcadius through his wife Eudoxia to grant a request to have all pagan temples in Gaza destroyed. This request was eventually granted, and after all temples had been destroyed, Porphyry built a church over the ruins of Marnas's temple with financial and other assistance from Empress Eudoxia. So, interesting stuff there. And we now understand, I think, the context for all the scripture we are getting ready to dive into. So, now, without further ado, we are going to be getting into scripture, as I said. But I thought it'd be useful to first know who Samson is, know how this story can be interpreted and useful to you right now in 2020, and know a little bit about Dagon, who the deity that Samson is going to destroy the temple of, who he is and what he represents historically. So now we've done that. We're 30 minutes in. So surely we can finish all this scriptural reading in the next 40 minutes or so. Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, and people say the Pope's hat is a nod to get Dagon. Exactly. Hold on. Thank you very much, okay, for reminding me. I totally forgot. Exactly. Let me pull that up. I wanted to highlight then the differences between the mitre hats, between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. That if you look at Orthodoxy, there we go. Here we go. Now we got a mitre hat up here now. So if you look at Orthodoxy, the mitre hat is a round cap and it has a cross on top. No problem. Looked very similar to crowns that people put on when they're going through their marriage ceremony. No big deal, right? However, it's very interesting that in the 10th century, that the Latin West went in a very different direction with their mitre hat. That their mitre hat looks eerily similar to that of the headgear worn by Dagon priests. And we see the fish head on top of the Dagon priest if we look up here in the top left corner, and we see its similarity with that of the mitre hat of the Pope. Interestingly, often it's red inside of the Pope. So if we see the Pope picture where it says something very fishy in Western religion, we see a red mouth inside his hat. We see the two eyes on his hat. We see what appears to be very reminiscent of the priest of Dagon. Now, the fact that we see the papacy in lockstep with globalism, the fact that we've seen the papacy really promote a sort of global treaty with the CCP, with globalist banking, with every other world faith that exists, with their ecumenicism. Is it a surprise that we would find pagan regalia in Catholicism? And so looking up to this, I wanted to be objective. So I was like, you know what? Let me look up a Catholic refuting this whole idea. You know, maybe there's another explanation for the similarities of the headgear. So I looked up a Catholic refutation of the associations of the Catholic mitre hat with that of Dagon, and I found nothing of real significance. The only thing was, yeah, right, the Pope's mitre hat started in the 10th century. Like, that's totally that has nothing to do with Dagon. And the point, really, for me at a sort of theological level is we already see, you know, from an Orthodox perspective, the whole movements of the papacy, even during that time period, the centralization of power in what we would call the papacy in the Latin West, the variations in their theology, and really, you know, just the fracturing of Christian theology from the Great Schism moving forward, that is it surprising that maybe the Latin West is wrapped up in some pagan traditions, and in fact, maybe that's why they are so in lockstep with Satanism itself and the globalist agenda right now? No, I think, in my opinion, they go quite well. So I'm not too confused by that, but I could imagine some Catholics, one, being very upset with me, which is fine. But I don't know. I just, it makes too much sense for me. It makes too much sense. So I just wanted to highlight that. Maybe there's not a connection, but it is interesting that when the Catholics try to say, well, look, we weren't doing this for the first 10 centuries. Yeah, that was because you were Orthodox then. That was because that was before the Great Schism. That's because if you look at the mitre hat of the Orthodox, it looks nothing like that. Why did they change tradition and make it look something like that? Look, that looks, the mitre hat in Orthodoxy looks nothing like that, unless, as you can imagine, that maybe they have pagan elements, and maybe the Catholic Church has been a vehicle for the evil one for a while. But I digress. I know that may ruffle a few feathers. I apologize. I'm not trying to make anybody upset. So let's get that down. Now we can get to some scripture. Well, I guess before I should highlight, we got a couple new super chats, so I'll just read those real quickly. Pano throws in another $2. He says, female empowerment equals Delilah seduction tactics. Absolutely, Pano. That is absolutely another great point. And again, as we read through this, I hope you guys continually post comments about how, when we read this story, that can be interpreted as another way how it relates to the contemporary man, because that is a great point, Pano. Thank you for that. Gen Z Philosophy throws in $4.99 and says, what's more real, the legitimacy of the office of the papacy or the WWE Royal Rumble? Boy, I'd probably say the WWE Royal Rumble. There's not a fundamental contradiction in that. But anyways, thank you very much, Gen Z Philosophy, for the $4.99. I really appreciate that, brother. Okay, so now we are in Judges. We are in the Orthodox Study Bible, and we are getting ready to start with chapter 13, and we're going to read about the life of Samson. So the life of Samson. Again, we are in chapter 13 in the book of Judges. Again, the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Now there was a certain man from Zorah, and the tribe of the family from the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and could not give birth. And an angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, indeed, now you are barren and have not given birth, but you shall conceive a son. Now, therefore, be careful, do not drink wine or strong drink, do not eat anything unclean. For behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. And no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, as I go through here, I want to read all the footnotes within the Orthodox Study Bible. And so the first footnote reads, that despite God's continued faithfulness, the sons of Israel still apostatize, a pattern repeated throughout the book of Judges. After 40 years of bondage for Israel, God made known his plans through his angel to deliver Israel by means of a special son born to a barren woman, as also happened with Sarah, Rebekah, Hannah, and Elizabeth. A Nazarite is derived from the Hebrew Nazir, means consecrated or dedicated. The one making a Nazarite vow refrains from strong drink, eating unclean things, and ever cutting the hair. So that, again, gives you an understanding of what a Nazarite is and how he is that. So moving on, we're in verse 6 now in chapter 13 of Judges. So the woman went in and told her husband, saying, quote, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of an angel of God, very frightening. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, behold, you are pregnant, and shall bear a son. Now drink no wine, nor strong drink, and do not eat anything unclean, for the child shall be holy to God from the womb to the day of his death. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, Lord Adonai, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born. Also, the footnotes that I wanted to read. Samson was a Nazarite unto God from the womb, as were the prophets Samuel and John the Baptist. Samson would begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines, a work carried further by Samuel, Saul, and King David. And now continuing on, it reads, and God listened to the voice of Manoah. This is the father of Samson. And the angel of God came to the woman again as she was sitting in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. Then the woman ran in haste and told her husband and said to him, quote, "Look, the man who came to me the other day has just now appeared to me," unquote. So Manoah arose, followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said to him, quote, "Are you the man who spoke to my wife?" unquote. And the angel said, quote, I am, unquote. Now, I thought that was really interesting. There's no footnote on that, but we know that the angel of the Lord is the Logos, right? The Logos is Christ. And I loved how right here in Judges, the way the angel responds is not yes, not of course, or anything like that. He responds, I am. Reminiscent of Exodus, Moses, Mount Sinai, you know what I mean? Manoah said, quote, "Now let your words come to pass. What is to be the decision regarding the boy and his activities?" unquote. So the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "The woman will guard herself from everything I have told her. She may not eat anything that comes from the vine of wine, and let her not drink wine or similar strong drink, nor eat anything unclean. All that I command her, let her observe." Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, quote, "Let us delay you here, and we will prepare a young goat for you," unquote. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, Though you delay me, I will not eat your bread, but if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord," unquote. For Manoah did not know he was the angel of the Lord. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name? So when your words come to pass, we may honor you," unquote. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why do you ask my name? Is it extraordinary?" unquote. So Manoah took the young goat and the sacrifice and offered it upon the rock to the Lord. And the angel wrought a distinct work while Manoah and his wife were looking on. And it so happened when the flame went up above the altar toward heaven that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell upon their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and his wife, Manoah knew this to be the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to his wife, quote, "We shall surely die because we have seen God," unquote. But his wife said to him, quote, "If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a meat offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have made us hear such things as these at this time," unquote. So the woman bore a child and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to proceed out of him at the camp of Dan between Zorah and Ashdol. So some of the footnotes that I wanted to share with you guys here is that not only does the angel of the Lord prophesy Samuel's birth and calling, but the Spirit of the Lord attends his life. So as we will see moving into the next chapter. So chapter 14. Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the foreigners. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, quote, "I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, get her for me as a wife," unquote. Then his father and mother said to him, "Are there not daughters of your brethren or a woman among you of my people? Must you go and get a wife from the uncircumcised foreigners?" unquote. And Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." So again, we see Samson disregarding the advice of his parents, saying, don't you want a little in-group preference? And he says, no, she pleases him to his eyes, right? And so I think many of us men may fall victim to this problem, the sort of aesthetic beauty, right? Women, just the female figure, there's something about it that's very seductive, right? That it's very different from the male figure in the sense, even within art, right? Where it's so prominent to display the sort of feminine figure, if you will. So very temptuous, especially to the eye. There is a visual dimension to female beauty. So Samson says, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking vengeance against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came roaring against him. And the Spirit of the Lord leapt upon Samson, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hands. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then they went down and talked with the woman, and she was pleasing to Samson's eyes. After a few days, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and some honey were in the mouth of the lion. He took some of it in his hands and went along eating. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the mouth of the lion. So his father went down to the woman, and Samson gave a party there for 7 days, as young men do. And when they saw him, they brought 30 guests, and they were with him. Then Samson said to them, quote, "Let me tell you a riddle. If you can correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the party, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen cloths and 30 changes of clothing." And they said to him, quote, "Tell the riddle, let us hear it." And so he said to them, "What meat comes forth from the eater, and from the strong sweetness?" What meat comes forth from the eater, and from the strong sweetness? But 3 days passed by, and they could not explain the riddle. But on the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, quote, "Now trick your husband so that he explains the riddle to you, or else we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Did you invite us to do violence?" Unquote. Then Samson's wife wept before him and said, "You hate me. You do not love me. You told the sons of my people a riddle, but you have not explained it to me." Unquote. And Samson said to her, quote, "If I have not explained it to my father nor my mother, why should I explain it to you?" Unquote. Now she wept before him for 7 days while their wedding banquet lasted. And on the 7th day he told her, because she annoyed him so much. Then she explained the riddle to the sons of her people. And the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun rose, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" And Samson said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have come to learn my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord leapt upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck 30 of the men, took their apparel, and gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So Samson's anger was aroused, and he went back up to his father's house. And the wife of Samson was given to one of his companions, one whom he called a friend. So, again, what do we see here? That the Philistine wife that Samson has chose, though pleasing, very pleasing to his eye, she chose loyalty to her people, chose loyalty to her group over that of her new husband. And so when things became very stressful, we see how they unfolded. Again, just something to keep in mind. Now, I'll read a few of the footnotes here for chapter 14, and they read, at least for verses 1 through 5, Samson's desire to marry a woman of the Philistine bore ill fruit. The woman was more faithful to her own people than to him. Again, I just highlighted this, that Samson's desire to marry a Philistine woman bore ill fruit. Now, do our relationships bear good fruit or ill fruit depending on who we are having relationships with? I think this is something to keep in mind. The next footnote is from, it's for verses 5 through 9. It says, St. Ephraim the Syrian writes that Christ prefigured Samson, also tore the lion, an image of death, and caused to go forth from his bitterness and sweetness of the life of men, unquote. As with many riddles, once the answer was given, it was obvious. That was regarding the riddle that Samson gave, and that really covers the footnotes for chapter 14. Now we're going to be diving into chapter 15 and 16, or where things really get going here. So looks like everything's going good in the chat. Yeah. So chapter 15, the book of Judges. I'm going to make Pano a mod. Sorry, I didn't realize that we had we got yeah, so OK is a mod, and Pano, you're now a mod, bro. So chapter 15 in the book of Judges. Soon after these days, in the days of the wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a young goat. Now remember, Samson had left his wife. They had been married. They had their big banquet, their honeymoon, if you will, the ceremonial 7-day party, as young men do, as it says. And then he leaves. He's annoyed with his wife. He's so annoyed with her, he ends up telling her the riddle. Then all the other group finds out. She's more loyal to them than to him. And so, frustrated as he is, he gives them the cloth that he said he would, and he goes back to his father's house. So this is where we're at now. So now Samson, leaving his father's house, actually going back to his wife. It makes it seem like weeks, maybe months have passed at this point. So soon after these days, in the days of the wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, quote, "I will go to my wife in her private chamber," unquote. But her father would not permit him to enter. Her father said, quote, "I thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore I gave her to one of your friends. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead," unquote. And Samson said to them, quote, "This once I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines, for I do mischief among them," unquote. Then Samson went and caught 300 foxes. And he took torches and turned the foxes tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of their tails and tied it. When he had set the torches on fire, he sent the foxes out into the standing grain of the Philistines, and they burned from the threshing floor even to the standing grain, as far as the vineyard and the olive groves. Then the Philistines said, quote, "Who did this?" unquote. And they answered, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he took his wife and gave her to one of his friends," unquote. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Samson said to them, "Whereas you dealt thus with her, surely I will take revenge upon you for a month, and I will finally stop." So he struck them upon the thigh of the leg with a great blow. Afterward he went down and dwelt in a cave at the rock of Etam. Now the Philistines went up and encamped in Judah, and they spread out across Levi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" unquote. So the Philistines answered, "We have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he has done to us," unquote. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cave at the rock of Etam and said to Samson, quote, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? Why do you do this to us?" And Samson said to them, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." But they said to him, "We have come down to bind you so that we may deliver you to the Philistines." So they spoke to him, saying, quote, let me start this passage over. But they said to him, quote, "We have come down to bind you so that they may deliver you to the Philistines." Then Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves," unquote. So they spoke to him, saying, quote, "No, but we will bind you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we will surely not put you to death," unquote. And they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When they came to Lehi, the Philistines wailed loudly and ran to engage him. But the Spirit of the Lord leapt upon him, and the ropes on his arms became like flax burned with fire, and his bonds fell away from his hands. He found the jawbone of an ass that had been cast aside, and he reached out and took it and struck 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, quote, "With the jawbone of an ass I utterly destroyed them. For with the jawbone of an ass I struck down 1,000 men." Unquote. And so when he had finished speaking, he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place the Ramath Lehi. Then he became exceedingly thirsty and wept for the Lord and said, "You were well pleased to grant this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. Now I shall die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised." Unquote. And God broke open a hollow in the whole God broke open a hollow in the ground, and out from it water came forth, and he drank. His spirit returned, and he was revived. Therefore he called it the spring of the one who called, which is in Lehi to this day. And in the day of the Philistines he judged Israel for 20 years. So some of the footnotes before getting into chapter 16 here of 15. First footnote reads, "I will do mischief among them." This signals the beginning of the back and forth revenge in the chapter, an eye for an eye, which eventually leaves Samson blind, but Samson finally prevails over the Philistines. For all Samson's strength, he nearly died of thirst. Jesus said, quote, "If anyone thirsts, let them come to me and drink." Unquote. John 7:37. Even the strong are utterly dependent on God, who by a miracle provided water. And those were the only footnotes for chapter 15. Now we get to chapter 16, where the real meat and potatoes of the story of Samson get going. So now we get into Samson and Delilah, right? His Philistine lover, if you will. So Samson, chapter 16 in the book of Judges. Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. So one note is not that they fornicated. Maybe they did. It seems like it doesn't actually say. There's no footnote for this. I looked this up. Some people believe that he went and stayed at her house and he slept there till midnight, as will become apparent. But based on reading it, it almost seems like that they had intercourse, if you will. It's hard to tell. But now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. When someone told the Gazites, saying, "Samson has come here," they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, quote, "Let us wait until dawn, and we will kill him," unquote. Samson slept till midnight and rose up, and at midnight he took hold of the doors of the gate of the city with 2 gateposts, and lifted them up with the bar, and placed them on his shoulders, and then carried them to the top of the mountain facing Hebron, and he set them there. Now, note that is about 30 miles away, so it's very interesting. I don't think that maybe this is totally historically accurate. It's hard for me to imagine a man wakes up at midnight and goes and moves an entire gate 30 miles onto a mountaintop before sunrise. But anything's possible with God, I suppose. Sometime thereafter, he came to love a woman in Alsarich, whose name was Delilah. And the leaders of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Trick him and find out where his great strength lies. Learn by what means we may overpower him, so that we may bind him and humble him. If you do, every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, quote, "Please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you can be bound, that you may be subdued and controlled." And Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 damp cords, not yet spoiled, then I shall become weak and be like any other man, unquote. So the leaders of the Philistines brought 7 damp cords, not yet spoiled, and she bound him with them. And with her in the private chamber an ambush was set. And she said to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he broke the cords as if someone should break a thread of flax when it touches the fire. Thus the secret of his strength remained unknown. Then Delilah said to Samson, Indeed, you deceived me and told me lies. Now therefore tell me what you may be bound with. So he said to her, quote, If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man, unquote. Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and those in ambush came out of the private chamber. And she said to them, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he broke them as if with his arms like they were thread. And Delilah said to Samson, quote, Indeed, you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me, I entreat you, with what can you be tightly bound? And he said to her, If you weave the 7 locks of my head into a braid, and secure them together with a wall peg, I will be weak like any other man. And so she braided the 7 locks of his head, and secured them with a wall peg, and said to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he awoke from his sleep, and pulled out the peg. Then Delilah said to Samson, How can you say I love you, when your heart is not with me? You deceived me a 3rd time, and you have not yet told me where your strength really lies. And it came to pass, after she pestered him continually with her words, and pressured him sorely, that his spirit failed him almost to death. Then he told her everything in his heart. And he said to her, quote, No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a holy one of God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like all other men. Unquote. First note here, I know I'm breaking up the Bible reading, is maybe this is a scriptural warning to not convey all that is in a man's heart to a woman. It may just, in fact, be used against you. So, wise words here, maybe something to keep a heads up on. Moving on, and Delilah discerned, he told her all of his heart. And she sent and called for the leaders of the Philistines, saying, Come up once more, for he told me all in his heart. So the leaders of the foreigners went to her and brought the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Thus she could finally subdue and control him, for his strength departed from him. And Delilah said, quote, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And so he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes, and they brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with fetters of bronze, and he was grinding grain in the prison house. So we see that he was deceived, right? He was tempted by a woman outside his tradition, if you will, was deceived, was blinded, was weakened, and he's now turning grain in the prison house. So he's a slave. And so again, this is where I think there's some overlap, some symbolic overlap for many of us men in the modern world. Soon the hair of his head began to grow as before it was shaven, and the leaders of the Philistines met to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon and to make merry. And they said, quote, Our God delivered our enemy, Samson, into our hands. When the people saw Samson, they praised their God, for they said, quote, Our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, the one who multiplied our dead. Unquote. And when their heart was merry, they said, quote, Call Samson out of the guardhouse and let him play before us. Unquote. So they called Samson from the prison house, and he played before them. And they slapped him and stationed him between two pillars. Then Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, "Let me feel the pillars that support the house, so that I can lean on them." Unquote. Now the house was full of men and women, including all the leaders of the Philistines, with about 700 men and women on the roof watching while Samson played. Then Samson wept before the Lord, saying, "Lord, my Lord, remember me now, O God. Strengthen me just this once, so I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." And Samson took hold of the 2 pillars of the house, the very 2 which held up the house. He leaned himself against them. He grasped one with his right hand and the other with his left. And then Samson said, let my life end with the Philistines." And with all his strength he pushed down the pillars, and the house came crashing down on the leaders and all the people in it. In his dying, Samson caused more people to die than were brought to death in his life. And his brothers and all his father's household came there and took him. They brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtal in the tomb of his father Manoah. He judged Israel for 20 years. And that concludes our reading of Samson. So that is Samson. I want to read some of the footnotes, though, for chapter 16. They're pretty good. The first footnote for chapter 16 reads, "Since the gates of the city was locked by night, the Gazites assumed all was well until dawn. Samson awoke at midnight, tore down the doors, and carried them to Hebron, a distance of over 30 miles. Next footnote is, Ulcerich is a valley in Sorek. Delilah, though we are not told, presumably was a Philistine. Samson's love for her for a time period proved stronger than his call from God to deliver Israel and brought him down." So I love that Samson, not being led by the will of God necessarily, is brought down by his lust, by his love for the Philistine woman Delilah, who ultimately backstabs, betrays, and blinds him. Well, she doesn't, but she allows it to happen. So, interesting stuff there. The next one is that St. Irenaeus writes on this passage, quote, "The lad who guided Samson by the hand typifies John the Baptist, who showed to the people the faith in Christ. And the house in which they were assembled signifies the world in which dwell the various heathen and unbelieving nations, offering sacrifices to the idols. Moreover, the 2 pillars are the 2 covenants. Samson leaning himself up against the pillars indicates this, that the people, when instructed, recognize the mystery of Christ." And also another footnote is the phrase let him play before us likely refers to the request that Samson do tricks only a strong man could do. And so I had questions when I first read that, and that footnote was really helpful. Is play before them. What is he doing playing before them? But they're having him do strongman feats in front of them. And that is all the footnotes, and that is all the reading. Now, again, I'm on a time crunch, so I do have to hop off here pretty soon. If you guys have any questions, feel free to throw those in there right now. But again, why did I think this was so interesting? Well, when we talk about strongmen, I've had multiple people reference, with the logos fitness stuff. Oh, well, why don't you make Samson your logo? You should have made Samson your logo. I get that. I think it's not a bad idea. However, and Samson is a sort of typology of Christ, as we've already seen. This is rooted within our Orthodox theology and the church tradition. But his habit of being tempted with the Philistine women, his ability to be deceived, I don't think that's necessarily the greatest symbol, so that's why I chose not to have Samson as the symbol of, the fitness stuff. But I get the idea, and he certainly is a very, emblematic of the strong man, and he does ultimately do God's will, right? And so it's very interesting that the derivation from God's will in the pursuit of Delilah, uh, leads him to all the negative, right? All the things that Christ frees us from, right? Christ gives us sight, right? When the spittle in the clay or the mud wipes it into the man born blind, right? Born blind. It's not like he was seeing and then something happened and he fixed it. The man was born blind. Potentially the man was born without eyeballs. And so Christ gives us sight. So we see Samson lose his sight in his pursuit of a beautiful woman, most likely. We see Samson lose his strength in the pursuit of this beautiful woman in Delilah. Often is the case with us, right? We lose our real strength, our powerful strength, our righteous strength, our spiritual strength when we move away from God, but towards something in the world. Now, that may be power, that may be money, that may be status, that may be women for you. But again, we see how that informs us in the present day, in the present moment. We see that he is a slave. Christ is the one who sets us free. We have freedom by being a bondservant to Christ, right? This is what Paul writes in his epistles, is that real freedom is actually to be a slave to Christ. And when you're not a slave to Christ, you become a slave of this world. And I tried to highlight this actually in my stream multiple months ago in regard to being addicted to this world. This was when a friend of mine that I grew up with died of a heroin overdose. And I talked about the addiction to this world and how really there is no freedom outside of the discipline of a sort of Christian life. And when you get outside of those parameters, what would seem to be like freedom, like sexual liberation or whatever it is, drug addiction, any sort of addiction to the world, is ultimately a form of slavery, is ultimately a form of entrapment. And we're being entrapped by the evil one, if you will. So I think it's important for all of us men to be conscientious of that, to be on the lookout, right? And see how that works. Also, when we are not following Christ, we're going to find ourselves being tied to the pillars of the temple of our enemy, right? And I think this then is symbolic of where we see America now. You know, so many of us, again, maybe 4 years ago, we weren't advocating for monarchy or anything like that. Maybe we were more liberal or progressive. And so it took a while, maybe through some of our own spiritual journey, our own spiritual advancement, our own education, our own lived experience, that we began to realize that, geez, something isn't right here in the U.S. You know, we're now the biggest exporters of degeneracy, of the LGBTQ stuff. And Trump being inaugurated in 2016 is kind of the beginning point. I say with a lot of people, that was kind of the beginning point of a paradigm shift. And so Samson being tied to the pillars of his enemy is really, for a lot of us, waking up and realizing that the cultures we live in, the nations we live in, everything that we believe to be good is all subverted, and that it's all reoriented towards the enemy, right? The American empire, the endless wars, the promotion of sexual degeneracy, the promotion of abortion, the CIA, the FBI, the intelligence agencies influencing other nations, right? The alliances with the CCP. What we realize is the idea of the Americans, and I'm separating Americans from America as a sort of all capitalized United States government type of name. But we realize that we as a people, I mean, now I saw today Kansas was struck down by the Supreme Court from trying to establish a sort of voter identification law, that it's like the states now can't even have authority over their own elections. That we realize that, geez, we are chained to the pillars of our enemies right now. That there is no Christian nation in America. There is no Christian values. There is no favor of America in the eyes of God. How could there be? Maybe there was in the early 20th century. Maybe there was in the 19th, 18th century when they broke away from King George. I know, again, if you're a monarchist, maybe you have different opinions on that. I'm not the biggest fan of the British Empire, so whatever. But I think, again, we see how that symbolism, how what's amazing when you read scripture like this, how the validity of the story of Samson can resonate at so many different levels, right? We can understand the role of men as protectors. We can see the problems of being tempted by women outside of our faith traditions, right? So there's so much that can be garnered here. And then of course we see the ultimate self-sacrifice that a man does. And so interestingly, again, another way in which we can interpret this, it was when Samson then cries out to God, right? He's tied between these pillars. He's being mocked and he's being forced to play in front of the Philistines. He has no eyeballs. They've taken his eyeballs out. He pleads to God to give him just one last strength to tear these pillars down. And so when the man then reunites with God, when his hair of that religious obligation of the Nazarite begins to grow back, he then becomes self-sacrificial. Again, archetypal of Christ, archetypal of most famous generals, archetypal of most famous men who are leaders. Is that when you lead to a degree, yes, there is a sort of individualism related to that, but also it's for the purpose of a sort of collective community, that you're doing it for a greater good. And so again, we see that with Samson. When he returns back to God, he returns back to a sort of self-sacrificial place in which actually his own self-sacrifice kills more Philistines than anything he could have done while living, anything that he did do while living. And so I think it's very interesting. And there's a lot to be garnered from there. It's interesting that we see the barren woman motif again with his mother being barren, and that the angel of the Lord comes and tells her that she's going to bear a great son. So yeah, that's basically all I have. Yes, Jesue Samson. Thank you, Daniel E. Thank you very much, brother, for the super chats. I really, really, really appreciate it. I'm going to run through the super chats one more time. Again, I got 10 minutes till my class for my church theology course starts. So I'm going to have to hop off here. But Pano, good ortho bro, fellow Hoosier, threw in $5 earlier and said, these are purity laws which prevent you from losing your identity. Christ extends his invitation to all. However, this doesn't dissolve distinctions. And what he was talking about is sort of the in-group, out-group distinction in regards to Israel and Palestine, or the Philistines, Israel and the Philistines. And then how we can understand that as Orthodox Christians, being Israel, as Orthodox Christians, non-Orthodox Christians, and how we go about finding women to build families with, and how when we go with women outside those parameters, things tend to fall apart. And as with Samson, sometimes the women will align with their people, with their group, over what's supposed to be the devotion towards their husband. So that was from Pano. That was his first comment. And then he said, Pano threw in $2 more and said, female empowerment equals Delilah seduction tactics. And I thought this was really interesting. I'll speak to this just for a minute because I got to go. But the seduction tactics of Delilah, I think, are interesting. And it relates back to that meme that I shared earlier, right? Let me throw that up there. The meme of Delilah is right here. It says, Delilah on her IG story when she bowed to destroy the most powerful homeboy in the hood. And it shows Delilah holding that hair of Samson. Yeah, it certainly is a seduction tactic. And for women, if men are only just useful for sexual pleasure, seduction tactics seem rather obvious and makes sense, I guess, in that framework. Gen Z Philosophy threw in $4.99 and said, what's more real, the legitimacy of the office of the papacy or the WWE Royal Rumble? Of which I would have to go with the Royal Rumble. So thank you very much, Gen Z Philosophy, for the $4.99. I greatly appreciate it. And then Daniel E., thank you so much, brother. You've been very supportive over the last few months. I really, really thank you. So thank you very much. Daniel E. has thrown in $9.99, and he said Jesue Samson. And so long live Samson as well. I hope you guys love that. I thought this was very useful. That's why I made a stream on it. I did my own reading, reread the story of Samson, and thought, geez, this is useful. This is interesting. I got to make a stream about this. Pano said they should rename OnlyFans to Little Delilahs. Oh, I love that. That's hilarious. I love that. Yeah, they should really. Let me read some of this stuff in the chat. Samson was on a carnivore diet. Yeah, no doubt. Samson's eating that lion's honey. Samson, Broda smoking that Hindu Kush. Delilah destroyed him with that whap. He did. She definitely did destroy him with that whap. That's for sure. He did fall victim quite easily. Hey guys, again, I got to get off here, but smash that like if you can. If you haven't, please smash that like. I hope you guys really did like today's stream. I thought it was good. Pano said, fancy way of saying it's the word of God. I think he must have been referring to how I was talking about the multiple layers of truth and stuff regarding the story. T.A. Bear said, we are chained to our enemy's pillars. Very good analogy, just like Samson. Yeah, we absolutely are. There's no doubt about that. The evil one always portrays it as a type of liberation or freedom. Absolutely. Because it's a false form of liberation, that it's really the only type of liberation, quote, he can offer, which is really only a form of entrapment because he's relegated and stuck within the world of creation. So the person who can offer you liberation in regards to Satan, he can only offer you liberation in regards to a limited context, where liberation as being a bondservant or a slave to God, slave to Christ, that's transcendent. That liberation is infinite. And that liberation has no bounds. That's real liberation, right? So, yeah. People get addicted to the money and end up slinging drugs and end up in jail. Dr. Klaus Schwab said that. Yeah. So, I think I'm going to hop off here. Again, thank you, OK. Thank you, Pano, for moderating the chat. I really appreciate it, guys. T.A. Beer says, thanks for a great stream. Thank you, brother. Thank you for everybody who stopped in today. Mark Schmitz, those are the thumbs up. Thank you very much, brother. I appreciate it. Jimmy says, great stream. Thank you very much. Dr. Klaus, prayers to you and your family. Thank you very much, Dr. Klaus. I really, really appreciate that. And again, I will be back Saturday probably with a stream on putting my dog down. But tomorrow, don't forget, I'll be on with Luke over on Orthodoxy First. So make sure you check that out. Give that guy a sub and some likes. And always support our fellow Ortho bros, whether it be Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, whether that be David the Real Medwhite, if Sneck's on something, or of course Dyer. I mean, he gets plenty of views, but support everybody. We need everyone. So always help our brothers and sisters out. All right. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to hop off here. Thank you for all the love and support. Oh, Annie said, I missed most of the stream again. Haha, but I'll catch it later. You're still uploading to BitChute. Thanks for the good times, Patrick. Bless you and your family, sir. Well, thank you very much, Annie. I really, really appreciate it. And that's exactly what I'm going to start doing, is uploading all these streams over to BitChute. But have I started? No. But tonight will be a good one. Tomorrow, I'm going to start uploading these streams to BitChute. So I promise I'll start doing that. But yeah, everybody go check out Dyer's stream tonight. I think, as Jimmy said, I think he comes on in an hour or so. So go convene over in Dyer's chat. Give him a thumbs up. Shoot him some super chats. Again, thank you guys so much for all the love and support. And until next time, as always, God bless.